Hello, hello. Welcome to the first Q&A for 2023. And for those of you who haven't watched many of these before, basically my Patreon supporters can ask me any question they want every month, and I do one of these Q&As where I basically answer them. This month we've got two, and I'll jump straight into it. So the first question is from Matthew Grass and says, greetings from Bristol, UK. That's cool. I used to live in Bristol. Love the city. All the very best for 2023. Thank you. What would be your advice for a solo session of Alien RPG? Thank you for your feedback, Matt. Well, Matt, this is a tough one. Alien is really designed to be played with a group because you have these agendas in cinematic mode, which really allow players to have, these secret agendas that they're all pursuing that help to really build quite an intrigue-heavy story within a horrific scenario. And it works really, really well. But for solo, that obviously raises some massive issues. And for that reason, I wouldn't say that running cinematic scenarios is really going to be very easy to do solo. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. However, there is one supplement out called the Colonial Marine Handbook. I think that's what it's called. Just check. Well, it just says Colonial Marines on the spine there on my shelf. I think it's called the Colonial Marines Operational Manual or Operational Handbook or something like that, the full name. Anyway, the Colonial Marines Sourcebook is really very good, and it allows you to play Marines, Colonial Marines in the alien setting. And I believe that could be played solo, going through I think it's 9 set piece, like adventures, if you will, that are in the back of that book. And the reason I think that's easy to do is because there's less of that intrigue in the Colonial Marines sort of part of the alien world or the alien role-playing game. And it's very easy to fit yourself in as a player in a 2-person fire team. And that means it's just you and a companion NPC, if you will, or a GM PC, or whatever you want to call them. And that makes it, I think, quite easy to play in a solo game where because a lot of the solo games I play using the Year Zero engine, like Forbidden Lands, I recommend using a companion, or I do play them using a companion because they're just so deadly otherwise. And it's very, very much the same in Alien. So if I was to play Alien solo, I would be using the Colonial Marines Handbook. I would be playing as my main solo PC would be 1 person in a 2-person fire team, and then I would basically just read through the setups for each of those adventures and kind of run them, try and run them without, like, just to see what happens with them. So not necessarily try to run them by the book. I've not actually read all of them in very great detail, so this is just going off of without having gone into that book and specifically looked at it to answer this question with my solo hat on, if you will. That's how I would approach the game. We do have some additional supplements coming up. We're going to have the Colonists Sourcebook being released next. It's the next thing on the docket for the Alien RPG line, followed by a Space Trucker cinematic scenario, and then a Space Trucker Sourcebook. So that's kind of how they are planning to do the releases. And I think with colonies are much more going to be intrigue heavy. I think certainly the scenarios we've seen so far, Hope's Last Day, for example, and what's the big one? The Quick Start one. No, that's a Space Trucker one. So Hope's Last Day, for example, is the quick start, or in fact, I think it's at the back of the core rulebook from memory. It's at the back of the core rulebook. It's a very short adventure in cinematic mode. It takes place in just 1 act instead of 3, and it's set on a colony. And there's a lot of kind of agenda at play. And agendas also play quite heavily in Space Truckers, and you can have agendas at play in a Colonial Marines adventure as well. But I just think it's much easier to do in that type of play without them. Anyway, I'll stop waffling on, and that would be my answer to that. If I was going to play Alien solo, I would attempt to do it that way. And now that you've got me thinking about it, I might just try and do that on the channel as well, using my own suggestions. So we'll see what comes of that. I will say one thing that Alien works quite well with, which I was quite surprised about, is running it in duet mode. That's one GM and one player. And the reason for that is it's quite easy for the GM to know about the different agendas, to play those lots of NPCs in the group, and have the one player playing one of the group. And then when that player dies, because when that player character dies, which will happen, you give them one of the other pre-gens. I'm talking specifically about cinematic mode, of course. And then it's like a little light bulb aha moment that goes on when they're like, "Oh, this is the agenda. That's why they're acting a little bit that's why they're acting a little bit funny before." And they will the players will definitely lean into that. So you have to have the buy-in at the front from your players, from your single player, I should say, that they're probably going to be getting a different pre-gen when their preferred first one ends up dying. But that's the nature of the game. And I have run one person through part of a scenario like that, and it did that game kind of fell apart, but because of scheduling more than anything, but it worked very, very smoothly, I thought. So yeah, duet mode is definitely possible. I actually really love duet mode. It's something I'm trying to play more and more of these days, because it has a lot of the benefits of solo play, but allows you to, as a GM, to still have that control. And for the players as well, you get 100% spotlight, which is a really amazing experience. It sounds like it's quite intense, and it is quite intense, quite intimate. It could be, but that's actually what put me off ever trying. I've gone off, sorry, on a complete tangent here. But yeah, I love solo play. I was scared of it for a long time. I would cancel games if only one or two players were there. Now I don't do that all the time. With my Patreon games, I do it a little bit for other reasons, mainly just a time issue. But if I'm playing with a friend, I have a friend locally in town here who plays role-playing games, and I run a duet game with him, and it works really, really well. We've tried 3 different games now, and all of them have worked really, really well. So yeah, I'll stop waffling on about duet mode, but that's definitely another way that you could play Alien if you can find one mate who wants to play with you, not a full group. Okay, thanks, Matt. Neil's got the second question, and it's actually a 2-barreled question, so it's actually 2 questions here. We'll start with the first one. Hi, Matt. 2 possibly related questions. Yeah. I think I'll read through these both at the same time because there's going to be a little bit of talking about this whole topic. First question, what trends do you see in tabletop role-playing games that you think will take off or grow in 2023 and beyond? And the second one, there has been a lot of discussion about the plans to monetize D&D. I know you're not really a D&D player, and nor am I, but do you think this will have ripples out into the rest of the community? What effect, if any, might these changes have on smaller and indie publishers? Now, this question was asked before the entire OGL debacle broke out, and everyone took to social media to basically make Wizards back down on their new draft OGL that had leaked. So we've seen already in the 3 weeks since this question was asked, sort of things starting to move in this direction, or with this theme. So just to address this, let's address the second question first. Monetizing D&D. Well, we can tell that that's definitely what they're trying to do. That from the leaked OGL, and they've talked about it in shareholder meetings previously. Talking about how players are under monetized. Their CEO used to work for Xbox. So there's definitely, using terms like monetizing players, and bearing in mind that some of their top brass come from a video game industry. I think that's what we're likely to start seeing with D&D. Certainly with their new virtual tabletop, which is going to be coming out, I think, next year, whenever it comes out. I'm not going to use it. I think that's going to be happening. And I would have said before this whole OGL thing broke out, I would have said that Wizards tends to be the trendsetters, even though they might not be the ones who are the first to do something, because they have such a big piece of the pie. They're the ones that are kind of, setting the trends. And I would have said that, monetizing content would be something that other people would be eager to jump on the bandwagon for. But because of the whole OGL thing, I think a huge part of the hobby are now very savvy to the, how do I say this, the corporate nature of Wizards of the Coast, and are very likely, I think, to be reluctant to accept any similar monetized type of new ways of doing things. So I would suggest that this whole, whether there might have been a trend a month ago, people might have been predicting maybe a trend to see things starting to go a bit more like a monetized route, paying a subscription model for content, that sort of thing. I think now, because of the OGL, that's less likely to happen. And the effect, the ripples into the rest of the community and the effect on smaller and indie publishers, I think this whole fiasco with Wizards has been very, very good for the small and indie publishing scene, because people have been leaving D&D in droves. That said, it's still a very small minority of D&D players. But regardless, there are more people coming into the indie space than there would have been had this thing not happened. So while OGL have backpedaled and they're now trying to, placate everyone, the damage has been done. And people will go back to D&D, I'm sure of it now. We'll continue to play 5th edition. One D&D might sink because it looks like their new OGL is still very restrictive. But they've left the version 1.0 alone, so people can still play their 5e and their 5e homebrew without any, legal risks from Wizards. So I think that's going to keep happening, but there has already been people coming over to the kind of the smaller publishers. So that's been good. I'm hoping it's going to usher in a bit of a not a golden age, because we're kind of in the golden age of indie role playing right now. But I'm kind of hoping there are people have been talking for a couple of years now that this golden age of role playing is likely to come to an end at some point. You can't have too much of a good thing, that sort of thing. I don't necessarily agree with that. And I think the hobby is unique enough that making like parallels to other hobbies doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But it is possible, sure, that we might go through another dry phase like what happened in the early noughties, for example, and like late 90s, early noughties, when there were a lot of people who didn't play, myself included. But because of this change, I think we're more likely to see things continuing on as it has been, that this golden age is going to still continue for a while yet. So it's from my perspective, I think it's kind of breathed a new life into the indie scene. Not that it needed a new breath of life, but it doesn't hurt, right? So yeah, I hope that kind of answered your question. Going back to your first question then, what trends do I see in role-playing games that I think will take off or grow? Well, I'm very interested to see what's going to be happening with like these new gaming licenses that people have been making. The Orc, for example, the ORC, which is this collaborative one that a bunch of big publishers like Chaosium and Paizo and Green Ronin are getting behind to offer. Free League's doing their own. A couple of other ones are doing their own as well. But this new like open gaming license scene that's happening, that's kind of breaking out, and people making sure that they're protecting the rights of these open games. I think I kind of feel like maybe we'll see more third-party content than we have previously. But I think it's going to be hard to judge or gauge whether that's actually true, because it's so hard there's so much content out there, especially in the third-party scene, that it's hard to know exactly how much stuff is being released, because I'm sure there are a lot of things being released that just don't get the visibility that they need to succeed, and end up, sitting in the dark recesses of DriveThruRPG, never to see the light of day, or never to see table play, unfortunately. But that's what happens when you have just a glut of content, and more content than audience. So I don't know. Trends wise, I think we'll see more people experimenting with third party content because of the OGL stuff that's happened. I think we're still going to continue seeing more online play. I think the online barrier has been broken because of COVID, And although there's a lot of face-to-face starting to happen now and a lot of people going back to playing face-to-face, people aren't scared of online anymore, and I think that's only going to continue to grow. I think there are going to be more and more actual plays starting. I think we're probably going to see more YouTube channels and podcasts popping up with people doing actual plays of all sorts of different games, because that's kind of been happening already. I don't see that trend changing really. Other than that, I don't know about trends that I can see taking off. I'm very curious to see what happens with 3D virtual tabletops. I was a Kickstarter backer for TaleSpire, and I'm very excited to see what they come up with. But it's very D&D centric at the moment, so I haven't really used it very much. D&D is obviously doing their own 3D virtual tabletop. Tabletop Simulator has been around for a long time, and people use it for 3D stuff. But it's less immersive, and it's a bit fiddly, in my opinion, to use. There's quite a high learning curve. Whereas, TaleSpire, one person has to set up the worlds, and you can actually go to the bazaar and grab like whole buildings and things and just pop them in. It's fairly easy and fun to create maps, which you can then play with your friends. And I think we might see more of that happening in future. I know there's a module for Foundry as well, which allows like 3D maps. I've not played with it myself because it would probably break my PC. But the fact that these things are being developed and there is an audience for them and people are using them, I think is kind of interesting. So I have a feeling that this year might see more of that continuing, or more of them. Like, I think TaleSpire is probably going to be getting more visibility very soon, at least this year, I hope. As it nears its full release. I think it's still in early access on Steam. I'm pretty sure. So yeah, other than that, I don't know. Trend wise, I can't, I'm not, I'm not a good one for these sorts of things. I guess one thing that has been happening a bit more lately is, last year, and I can see this kind of continuing a bit more, is, people being a bit more switched on about inclusion and depictions of minorities in their games, specifically minorities. And I mean, I'm thinking specifically of Mythic Polynesia, which came out by the Design Mechanism not very long ago. And obviously, I'm for those of you who know, I used to do a podcast with a chap called Liam Stevens in New Zealand, who's Maori, and he kind of took to Twitter and tore Mythic Polynesia apart, breaking down why it's full of racist propaganda, effectively, and that it should have been better researched. The Design Mechanism should have done a lot better with kind of screening, it before publishing it. And it's kind of caused this massive debate between a bunch of the anti-woke mob, and people who are trying to say, look, this is actually offensive to a real group of people who are oppressed today because of colonialism. And anyway, I think we're going to see more and more people being switched on and noticing these things this year. And I hope to see the RPG space, the tabletop role-playing space, become more inclusive as a result. There's still going to be the anti-woke mob who are going to, grumble and cause fights and whatever because of it. But I think it's overall, I'm hoping it's going to be a net positive, and that people are going to be a bit more switched on and start thinking about these things. Liam has said before that what's important is not to try and avoid mistakes, not to try and cancel people when they do make a mistake. But to try and allow people to learn from their mistakes, because nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes, but it's how do we handle them? Do we handle them in a kind of in a good way, and try and honestly, apologize and make up for it somehow. A good kind of poster child for this is, I think his name is, I can't remember his surname, Luke from Pirate Borg, I think Limithron Publishing. And he noticed a racist stereotype that made it into his game, that he's responsible for. And he wrote a Kickstarter update where he took full responsibility of it and admitted his mistake, apologized, talked about how he's going to rectify it. And it was an incredible thing to read, and really encouraging to think that this sort of thing is, people are kind of stepping up and taking responsibility for these things. Is it going to be eradicated? No, not at all. And the anti-woke mob will still fight their corner to, try and stop people from ruining their games with their nonsense, as they would say. But I think people are getting more and more switched on about it, and I hope that that's something we'll continue to see getting better as a trend this year. Other than that, I have no idea. Yeah, I don't know. I've thought about this, and I really can't think of anything. It was the 3D tabletop space was the only thing that I could kind of see maybe getting more popular as a trend, but yeah. I think that's it. I think I've run out of things to talk about around this subject, so I'm going to stop here. Thanks very much for the questions, Matt and Neil, and thanks everyone else for watching. If you want to ask me questions to be in the next Q&A, you've got to be on my Patreon. A link will be down in the description below to take you there if you want to take a look at how much it costs to join and all the rest of it. Anyway, thanks very much, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers. Bye-bye.